Just let a few of you arrive. Perfect. I'm going to get kick-started because I know we've got a lot to get through in the next hour. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Holly. I'm the MD of BIMA. Welcome to another BIMA Hangout. I'm really pleased to be introducing the BIMA Human Behaviour Council today. And this is actually the first session that they're going to run proper. So it's really exciting. They launched just pre-COVID, so not the most luckiest of launches, but we've got there, and I hope this will be one of many. So as always, before we get into it, I just wanted to give a few words on BIMA for those of you that aren't necessarily that familiar with us, hopefully to get you more familiar and get you involved in the longer term. So BIMA is the largest digital and tech community in the UK. We represent digital talent wherever it is. So we're a member organisation that has agencies of all different types and sizes, brands, so in-house marketing and digital teams, tech companies, universities, charities, and everything in between. The common theme is that they're all really committed to delivering outstanding digital experiences. And also, you know, the common theme for BIMA is that they all are part of BIMA in order to drive the future of digital. So we do a ton of stuff, lots of events, lots of different programs are running and sub-communities and councils, but they all really speak to a number of different values. So the first is innovation. So it's about developing knowledge, best practice, case studies, craft. So, you know, we want to support people to excel in their craft. Talent, so it's about skilling people up and about, you know, really offering learning and development opportunities to those in industry, but also we work with future generations of digital talent in the school activity that we do. Leadership, so we really want to support our leaders in their challenges and to help grow their businesses. And I would say also, last but definitely not least, sustainability, and then inclusion and diversity. So we do a lot in supporting the industry to be a fairer, more diverse, more sustainable place to be. So if you would like to get involved, as I said, we've got lots of things happening pretty much every day of the week. Give us a shout. I'm Holly Hall at bima.co.uk or any of the team. Yeah, we'd love to speak to you. So it's enough from me. So our chair of our Human Behaviour Council and also our host for today is Daryl Scott. So Daryl is Director of Human Technology at Lab. He is also, so he said, I'm just really nice. I'm really great and really nice. But actually, he's got the best LinkedIn recommendations I've ever read. So best boss ever, a rebel, transformer and catalyst, and is a deep expert of what makes people tick. So I think that's kind of an incredible, you know, summation of Daryl. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Daryl.
Thanks, Holly. Thank you very much. So thanks for joining, everyone. As Holly said, this is our first event, so I'm a little bit boyishly excited. And it's really timely because we are in a strange period of time. As Holly said, we kicked off just before COVID, and of course, what an extraordinary time that's been to think about human behaviour and notice changes. So the context for today, or the question on the table, was how has behaviour changed? And obviously, being the Behaviour Council, rather than just observe differences, we're taking it a level deeper, and we're really questioning what's going on underneath that, and what's driving those changes, and obviously which ones are circumstantial, and which of those changes are here to stay and why. So we've assembled a great crowd today of fascinating people from the council. The council at BIMA is a joy. Everyone on it is really, really interesting and fantastic to spend time with. So, but the four people we've assembled today, I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and then they're going to kind of kick off with a bit of an intro. and they're going to tell us what's on their mind at the moment. They're all sort of thought leaders in their own right, so obviously they've got strong opinions and a great body of research and work from their day jobs. So I'm going to go to Orlando Wood first from System 1. So Orlando, can I invite you to introduce yourself and tell people what's on your mind and give them a bit of an intro?
Hello, Daryl. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. I, as Daryl says, work in advertising, specifically in advertising research. And I have been working with the IPA for the last 3 years, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, on their creative effectiveness research and development. And so I'm fascinated by what makes advertising work, how it connects with people, how it gets noticed, how it gets remembered, and how it works. And I wrote a book last year called Lemon, which was published by the IPA. And in it, I kind of trace a change in advertising style that's happened over the last 50 years or so. And I just want to show you what I mean by that. I hope you can see my screen here. What's happened is that advertising has started to look a lot like the ads on the left here. So there's something interesting about these ads. They're rather flat, they're lacking in depth. They have undue focus on the words, so words on top of everything. They abstract things from their context, so you just see people's lips or their hands. You see no sense of lived time, so lots of short, sharp cuts. And a kind of self-consciousness to everything. And it's very different from the kind of advertising that is over on the right-hand side here, that's full of depth and betweenness, connection between people, connection with place, with local place, humor and metaphor, and so on. And this shift in advertising style towards this flatness and abstraction has actually undermined its effectiveness. And it turns out that this kind of advertising doesn't get noticed, doesn't get remembered, doesn't elicit an emotional response in people. It's all happened in this digital age that we're now living in. So in many ways, advertising was already in crisis before it was in a crisis. And so that's what's on my mind at the moment. And it's actually because advertising both leads and reflects culture, this is something more, something broader than just advertising. And you can see it in television programming, you can hear it in music. It's a cultural shift that's happened before, and it's happening right now all around us. And so the pandemic was, is particularly fascinating from my point of view, because I wonder whether this might shift things back, because ultimately it's all to do with the way the brain attends to the world. But perhaps more of that in a moment. So that's it from me. Back to you, Darren.
Thank you, Orlando. Brilliant for that really interesting, thought-provoking kind of intro. And I'd add to that in a lot of the discussions I've been involved in, a lot of the research I've been privy to in the last few months. Human connection is the most extraordinarily strong theme at the moment for no doubt many reasons. So it's going to be fascinating to see what the consequence of that will be long term, which we'll talk about in a moment. I'm going to come to Natalie Nahai next. Some of you may have encountered her before through speeches or other things. She's a thought leader. She has been for several years in our industry, and an author. So Natalie, can we ask what's on your mind? I know you're working on some new projects at the moment. What's on the forefront of your mind?
Thanks, Dol. So I'm currently researching a new book on the psychology of evolving consumer behaviors, some of the deeper shifts that we're seeing as a result of this pandemic, what it's catalyzed and accelerated. And crucially, there's a couple of key insights that I think are particularly interesting. So one of the insights is around reappraising things that we value most. So a change in priorities, being more aware of what we consume and the impact it has. An interesting one around people reevaluating their relationship to brands. So can I trust this brand to put social and humanitarian concerns first? There's also some really interesting impact that I've seen on generational research. So the impact of taking an ESG approach as a business, making sure that you're able to hire the right people. There's been some interesting stuff around employee engagement being higher, retention being higher when you put sustainability and pro-social values at the heart of your business instead of on the side, like with corporate social responsibility. I've also been looking into this deeper shift from experiences that aren't just short-term pleasure-based and kind of pain avoiding, which is the more hedonic or hedonistic model, this kind of, I want to get a quick fix and let's see how we go. There's kind of a tension between that and a movement that we're seeing towards more eudaimonic, more meaning and purpose-driven experiences. And so it's interesting to see how some of the reprioritization of certain values is sitting alongside our desire for pleasure and avoidance of pain. An example, just to give you one, it might be, okay, you might fancy a cheeky beer with your friends on a Friday night, if you're able to get yourself to a pub with a group of 6 that's now been imposed. But maybe you don't just want to have a cheeky drink and get tipsy. Maybe you want to buy from a brand that's using a circular economy and has more sustainable products in terms of the packaging. So it's kind of layering up these different things that we're seeing. I don't want to take up too much more time, so I'm going to leave it there and throw back to the panel to hear more about what you all have to say.
That's lovely. Thanks so much, Natalie. And we're going to come across now to Will Hodge from Karmarama. Hi, Will. Joined the call just a moment ago because of tech issues. So if he looks flustered, that'll be why. Will, can I invite you to introduce yourself and tell us what's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks, Darryl. Hi, everyone. I'm Will Hodge, so I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Karmarama, a part of Accenture Interactive. And my role, as you might expect, is leading the strategy team in all of our thinking as a company. And the sort of heartbeat of a lot of that is the insight work that we do. And I'm sure that everybody else on the panel and maybe everyone else out there, it's been a phenomenally busy time for people like us because so much has been uncertain, changing, shifting, you know, at breakneck speed. And we've been spending a lot of our year just trying to get a grip on what's going on out there so that we can interpret it for brands and businesses to continue to operate. And that alone has been the kind of lion's share of effort when you suddenly understand that those channels, that part of your customer experience, which probably wasn't a priority pre-COVID, has become the predominant means through which your customers want to get hold of you. That is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week change of tack for an entire team to try and sort of reboot an entire experience. And that's sort of before you even get to communications, thinking about what Orlando was saying there. And I'm fascinated by that, actually, that one slide, because what we've been doing actually pre-COVID and all the way up through COVID is trying to understand how much of the change that we're seeing now will be lasting change. And one of the projects that we've been working on, which I think probably is going to be published next week, was something that was kicked off 12 months ago in response to the sort of overriding narrative of a nation divided and the Brexit story and all of that. And we wanted to kind of find our own truth. We felt like we wanted to cut through the London bubble, get beyond the media stories of how broken and beat up we were as a country, and see if we could find whether the idea of, or the ideal of, community life in this country was still around, whether it was there. And actually we went through a program of sorting through 50 different communities across the country to select 5. And we spent the last 12 months speaking to them, filming them. We've created a mini documentary. We've been sort of politely analysing the ways that they kind of get together and what they find important. And we've drawn out a set of conclusions, which actually, I think, when set against the world of brands and marketing, is potentially quite alarming. Because what we've found, and particularly through COVID, as I'm sure we're going to discuss in a minute, is that there are phenomenal swathes of communities who are actually formed on very, very sort of creatively instinctive means, that passion overrides any of the identity politics that we might want to believe or be led to believe. That there are actually some phenomenally positive stories of how people get together in this country and what drives them and motivates them to do so, and the openness with which they do that, which in its purest sense is an incredibly inspiring example of creativity. When you then look, perhaps maybe in, understandably so in COVID times, against the world of brand and marketing, it's totally understandable that brands are trying to fix how they operate. At the same time, they're losing a degree of confidence because they can't quite understand how it is they should connect with people, because, as Natalie says, the value shifts are everywhere. The fault lines of society are suddenly emerging. And it's actually more dangerous for brands to have a point of view or to express themselves as they want to. And they've felt like they've been a sort of, they've retreated a bit, if you like. And I guess my worry is, and it's why I think it's an interesting question to think kind of what's on your mind now, because I'm sort of trying to work out where we are now. What of what we've seen in this year will sustain, and what can we do as the people who help brands and work with brands and work within marketing to be able to drive a new resurgence in the value and values that sit behind brands in a way that can make them more successful in the most creative means possible, so that we don't ever have, Orlando, one of your slides again that shows us we're in this crisis of creativity. We have the opposite effect. We break new ground in how brands connect with people by demonstrating a really clear and sharp understanding of what it is that motivates people, beyond the slightly, dare I say it, sanitized view that maybe we've relied on for too long of what people or customers are like.
Perfect.
Sorry, taking a moment to unmute. Thanks, Will. That's fantastic. Great intro. And then lastly, Rachel Armstrong from Globant. Again, primed with some great ideas to bring to the conversation today. So Rachel, can I ask you to say hello and tell us what's on your mind?
Sure. Thanks, Daryl. I'm really excited to join this panel, especially about the kind of future of the COVID customer. I've been working the last 15 years in customer research and also behavioral science. And I really do believe that by observing and really talking to customers, you can create the foundation for great ideas. I have actually got some slides to share, so bear with me. Okay, so I thought it would be useful to just talk over some of the kind of key themes that we're seeing at the moment at Globant. We're doing quite a lot of projects with clients at the moment and internally, and we're really seeing this kind of theme of inverted behavior. So what I mean by that is what we were doing kind of pre-pandemic, the way that we'd interact and consume is actually having a kind of reversed effect of what's happening now today. So one of the kind of micro themes is this kind of personal to humanless. So if we think back to kind of really kind of premium experiences, they really came with the abundance of human interaction. So whether it was you being in club class or whether you're kind of going to a nice fancy hotel, typically there'd be like 200 people there and they would tend to every need from the moment you got there to the moment you checked out. And conversely, you've got the kind of less premium experiences, which are reliant on, say, kiosks and apps, but they are actually becoming a little bit more desirable. So I think that we really need to look at now how brands can create that really premium experience, but maybe through digital channels and less kind of human interaction. The other one I wanted to share with you was experiencing with masses, but to safety in numbers. So, we would all group together to have these kind of memorable experiences, whether you're a fan at a sports stadium or in a festival. And now we're all kind of on Zoom, which we are all today, and we're sat in our boxes. And I actually saw a really interesting stat, which was Zoom downloads, the 3 months in lockdown in the UK. They had more downloads than the entirety of 2019. And we're seeing that a lot of brands are just going, right, I'm going to take my service and stick it on Zoom. Secret Cinema, a great example of a really interactive experience around content. And they kind of did that. So they took their experience and then they just put it on the participation on Facebook and on social media. And that actually didn't really create that sense of connection and that sense of being part of something amongst a lot of other people. So they had a second stage to their strategy, and they actually looked back to the 1950s, and they've created a driving experience. So you get to go and experience with other people, but from the safety of your own car. And I think that there's a big question there about how brands can modify their experiences so that they can deliver services that add value, but are also safe in this world. And then finally, spontaneity to calculated fun. So, we're used to kind of doing anything the way that we want to, going anywhere with anybody. And now it's all kind of reversed. So, pop-up restaurants, a massive theme of the last few years. And I think that the anxiety and the, queuing, the act of queuing and waiting to experience something for the first time and get in there. Now we're actually seeing a shift to this kind of future forward planning consumer. And in response to that, we're seeing lots and lots of, huge uplift in these types of apps and services, which help you to put in kind of virtual queues. So there's lots of technology that's helping those solutions to keep people safe. So, I think that, the big kind of thing that's on my mind at the moment is how we need to reevaluate the mental models and the customer journeys that we've always kind of had, and how we actually adapt those for experiences, brands and products for the future. Thanks, Daryl.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. Well, thanks ever so much, guys. Welcome, everyone. And I suppose let's get on with a bit more sort of lively debate. So let's get on with sort of interrupting each other and stuff. So the question on the table is, what's changed? How's behavior changed? Why is it changed? What's next? It takes 100 days to make a habit. Someone said, no idea who said it, but someone, and people say it a lot. And we're well past 100 days. We're way past. So what's going to stick? What's here to stay? And one of the psychological models I use would suggest that our most fundamental human needs are contextual stimulation, self-determination, and human connection. And all three of those have been violated fairly extremely over the last 6 months in one way or another. So what's the impact of that? What's the consequence? So the question on the table is, what's changed? Why has it changed? What's going on? What's next? And thinking about the listeners, what should they be mindful of that helps them make sense of this new normal and the events that unfold going forwards? That's a really long, incoherent question. My apologies. So I'm just going to pick on someone to start talking. I'm going to go back to Orlando. It's been a while since we've heard from you.
Oh, right. Yes. Well, I think the first thing to say is that I think that the mode of attention that we pay to the world changed fundamentally in the first few weeks and months of the pandemic. And in my book, and I refer to the work of a great scientist called Ian McGilchrist, who talks about the way we attend to the world and the two brain hemispheres and the way that they attend to the world. And to cut a long story short, the left hemisphere is, it's not they do different things, they just have different ways of paying attention to the world. So the left hemisphere is very narrow and goal orientated and very focused. And it likes fixity, and it likes control, and it likes to manipulate the world. It's quite clever in a sense, but it's also very limited in many ways. And the right brain is what really presents the world as it is to us, and it's broad and vigilant in its attention, and it's alert to threat, alert to novelty. And what the reason I opened with the ads was that in the last 15 years or so, it's quite evident that in society, certainly in the West, we've moved to a more left brain, linear way of thinking about things. And so you see increased abstraction, focus on words, shorter time frames. All of these things reflect the way that the left brain likes to see the world. Now, in those opening first few months of the crisis, what we saw was a different kind of attention being paid to the world, one that was broad and vigilant, one where we were looking out for our friends and family and for ourselves, that we were kind of engaging the right brain again. And we were seeing this. There was a heightened sense of empathy. The right brain controls empathy, altruism, spontaneity. So people singing, clapping in the streets. Looking back at other things, the right brain's aware of its time and place in the world. And so it was looking back at, you saw it in music choices, all sorts of things, and also what people were wanting to watch as well. Humor, we were desperate for something to lift our spirits, and entertain us. This is something that the right brain specializes in because it can see that two opposing thoughts can both be true at the same time. So metaphor and humor are all very important for the right brain. We're kind of starved of right brain stimulus really at the moment in advertising and beyond. And the pandemic has made it worse because we're now isolated from each, in our worlds. But there is this sort of sense of heightened connection even in our isolation. And it might restore meaning for us. A crisis restores meaning often. And so what I think all of us tries to do in these periods is to, and a good principle for brands actually, is to be both maximally individual and maximally connected with those people around us. It's a good coping strategy, and it's very important for brands as well. So I think, you know, we've seen various shifts in emotion. We've seen fear, which is a pro-social emotion that brings us closer together. We saw that in the first few months of the crisis. But now I think we're sort of generally in our tracking data, certainly we're feeling pretty much as we were at the beginning of all of this. There's some sense of normality, but there's also a sense of frustration and anger as well, and lack of control. And brands that can help give people a sense of connection again, and also enable life, that can be seen to be shown to be enabling life rather than closing it down, stopping it, removing humanity and connection. That they're the ones I think that will connect best with people and perhaps grow.
Thanks, Orlando. Actually, I'll piggyback quickly on the back of that, because we've had a question from the audience, which is, do we think that brand loyalty still exists? So, for you, Orlando, and then for everyone else following, is what do we think of brand loyalty?
Well, I mean, there are those who say that it doesn't exist at all, like the Ehrenberg Baxter Institute, that really that the important thing is to drive penetration, and that everything else follows. That the laws of loyalty are basically predicated on penetration. I'm perhaps slightly less black and white than that, but I think there's certainly a case for sustaining interest, for sustaining and entertaining people on an ongoing basis through your communication, through your advertising, and of course through your experiences. And I think that a couple of other people on the panel today, at least, who will want to be able to talk more about that.
Darryl, can I chip in there?
Of course.
It's a fascinating but incredibly broad question, that, and I just wonder whether it's probably easier to think about it when you think about specific behaviors and how they've changed, specific buying patterns perhaps, and maybe one that I think we've all understood the true value of in lockdown, being stuck behind our front doors, which is the sort of the grocery shop, and seeing how that has fundamentally changed the way in which we do that, or certainly did during lockdown, and seeing some of those behavior changes sustained through time. It's fascinating to think, as you say, Orlando, about the experience of ultimately shopping through one platform, which narrows your perspective or point of view of choice, because arguably what your brain is designed to do, or seeking to do, is to have that familiar repetition of the weekly shop, the same products that go in week on, and the system and the experience will support that. So arguably, when the means of distribution of buying a product is shifting, it should or could change the way in which brands need to operate to create that mental distribution, to get into people's minds and be prevalent when they're making those choices. I think certainly we've seen, and I've been reading a lot about how, with big question marks over the high street and the changing nature of retail, lots of organizations are looking at direct-to-consumer strategies now, thinking, well, hang on a minute, we need to sell off our own platform straight to people. And actually, arguably, they might be somehow putting that, the means of distribution, as a way of driving loyalty, of making sure they're going to hold on to those customers, to the forefront of their strategies, perhaps arguably more so than the communications that would need to be sustained to make sure that that's seen as a good thing rather than a bad thing. And I think the grocery category is fascinating and will continue to change, I'm pretty sure. But it's quite interesting seeing how people have suddenly reassessed what purchases are essential and how they should, the sort of criteria of choice of a particular brand. And I think maybe we're starting to see that loyalty is disintegrating perhaps in some categories, where people are feeling that there's a new lens through which to look at something I'm spending a lot of my money on all of the time. So actually that the challenge sits more, not as a sort of, is it an established marketing strategy we should hold on to, but the consumer lens, the changing way that we're thinking about what we buy, and the fact that every penny now is far more accountable than it was this time last year, might be the single most important thing that's shaping whether the frequency of purchase through one particular brand is as prevalent now as it was before or not.
One thing, sorry, I was just going to very quickly just say, Will, Professor Mark Ritson says that in this new evenly distributed world where everyone is available to everyone in this virtual sort of sense, then it becomes all the more important for brand communications for any given brand, because you know, why would I go to this one over here that costs £20 when I could go to this one over here that costs £2? You know, and I could get them. So brand communications really help to make sure that, you know, you're still top of mind, salient, and the one that people want to go to. Sorry, Natalie.
No, it's all good. I think one of the other things that's been really interesting, in addition to Will and Orlando, what you've commented on, is the way in which we prioritize the values that brands stand for. So, for instance, one of the issues, obviously, that we consider during times of crisis and economic stress is, how much does this cost me? Where am I going to spend my money in a way that's meaningful, but also means I can eat, especially when a lot of people are now on limited budgets. I think one of the things that's interesting from a consumer behavior sort of perspective is that previously, when we talk about things like engagement and emotionally resonant interactions and personalization, we talk through the lens of psychometrics, personality traits. And what I'm starting to see is that there's also a different, perhaps in some ways deeper way to examine how loyalty is formed, how brand attachment is formed, how emotionally resonant communication is made. And that's through the lens of values. And I think in a situation in which you are fundamentally being faced with more existential questions, whether that's to do with the safety of loved ones, of yourself. We also had the huge amplification of the Black Lives Matter movement, which looks through the social lens. What do we value as a human species? How do we look out for one another? When you're in such a complex and emotionally rich and existential context, what does that mean for the brands that we choose to prioritize? Yeah, of course, you're going to want to sort of save money on whatever it might be, but we might also choose to no longer buy from a brand that has a terrible inclusivity background, or that is really incoherent in what they proselytize, what they preach versus how they behave. And so I think it's really important also to look at that in terms of longer term values, and in particular through the lens of the generational differences. If you're in a cohort like Gen Z or the millennials, so from age 18 to 36, 37, where you're not assured of being able to buy a house or to be able to have the same level of financial security as your predecessors, what then do you value? Do you value finances in the same way, or do you value your ability to save the habitable home that we have, or to try and reduce the harm that's being done to democracies through social media propaganda? Like, we're in a very, very specific time. So I think there's also much deeper consideration that needs to be paid to the more existential and social questions that we're having to face.
There's definitely this, as you say, is a generational difference in values. I think perhaps there always has been, but also, you know, picking up on your point earlier, Rachel, about moving things to more digital formats. One of the questions we had from the audience was, you know, I hate Zoom, and you know, is this a younger person's thing to be able to actually make that transition? Because I just don't bloody want to. So coming back to you, Rachel, on the back of Natalie's point, and broadening that into technology as well, how would you comment on that?
I love that. I think that there's definitely a need for some kind of three-dimensional, you know, Star Trek-like Zoom that we all kind of reaching out for at the moment. Yeah, I think technology does have a part to play in this. But I think it's, I think really what's just on the back of also what Natalie was saying, I think that there's quite a lot of negativity, and I think that we have a preconception to feel quite negative and the fallout of the pandemic to date. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting from the research that I've carried out is that it's actually quite a 50-50 balance. So there are a lot of people who have, you know, lost their jobs, gone into furlough, are really looking at how they spend that money. And I have seen a lot of those people being hit by that kind of inequalities of socioeconomics as well. But at the same time, we've had a lot of people that have really benefited from the pandemic from lots of different ways. One is financially, so they're not spending that kind of huge amount of money socializing, going out, having that kind of FOMO, fear of not doing everything, having, you know, released from that social pressure of having to go out and spend money all the time. And they're actually getting closer to their kind of financial goals of, be it a wedding or moving home. So there is quite a lot of positivity and people are benefiting from it as well. And I'm also finding that actually there are these kind of negative preconceptions that brands are kind of giving us to kind of go out and validate. And we're seeing that actually there needs to be a kind of two-pronged approach for their brands and services, one of which is that kind of supportive manner of getting things, helping people out and supporting them through times of trouble. But there's also that other part, which is unlocking brands to actually, tap into people with, more disposable income than they've ever had before. And they're also choosing those types of people that they want to be in a community with as well. There is that, that we've already discussed in the panel, that kind of theme of reassessment, and there's that reassessment of the types of people you want to hang out with and prioritizing those connections. So I think it's kind of less about fulfilling maybe human connection, but making more fulfilling connections with people. And to your earlier question, I really do believe that technology can help that, but there is definitely and always will be that sense to really reach out and be able to be in that physical bubble.
I think we evolved as a species by sitting around fires and telling stories.
Yeah, I think my favorite one with the bubble and pods and isolation cells, I think is quarantines. I think that might have been my favorite one that I've heard today.
Quarantines.
Yeah.
Lovely. I'm going to come back to Will on the community question, because you mentioned in the intro, Will, about some of the things that people are gravitating around and getting passionate about. And Rachel, you just touched on community in your response there. So what can you tell us about that, Will?
Well, I think being totally candid, this project I was talking about that's been running for 12 months, when lockdown happened and suddenly community was the sort of, the big thing, everyone was this reawakening of understanding that we're surrounded by people we need to connect with. We sort of thought, oh, well, maybe we've missed the boat, maybe that's it. We were sort of looking at a period of time that's never going to return again. But if anything, this 12-month period is unique because we've seen how we've engaged with 5 communities at the beginning of all of this, and we've watched them all the way through, and we've discovered things that have been quite very emotionally resonant. There are still real life stories of these people that have changed through COVID that I think speak to what Natalie's saying there about where you truly understand the values of individuals in a way that you wouldn't get if you believe some of the stories, certainly from last year. And the fact that actually things like identity can be a force for unity rather than difference or distinction or discrimination, if you like. And that actually, fundamentally, people are interested in things that can transcend any of those differences. And I think this comes back to the point we were mentioning before with Orlando, and actually the point about brands and how they find that means of connection. There is an opportunity, I think, and as we've seen, for brands to understand the interests of people as a means then to find their attention. And I think it's in that order. And certainly the work that we've been doing this year has been really pushing that point with the brands to understand that you need to go into the lives of people and culture first, and these communities, understand the dynamics that bind these people together, that are different today as they were 10 years ago. They're not about geography, they're not about people living in the same places as the people that they work and going to the same schools. They're very different. They're actually formed through social platforms or formed through passion points, but actually arguably they're much, much stronger than they were before. So there's a sort of almost a new model for how communities are forming and how they operate and how they run and what's right to them and what's not. That's quite pure, if you like. And what we've seen is that it's actually starting to shape opportunities to create new ways for brands to be facilitating stuff that people are interested in and see as valuable, rather than, as Orlando showed, this sort of retreating away from actually trying to reflect anything of culture in your communications at all. So actually, we think it's all out there. It needs to be brought into brands and organizations rather than brands trying to force their way into the communities.
I think that's what's happened, is that brands have, basically become a bit didactic, telling people what to think and do. And you've seen this breakdown in empathy. Funnily enough, empathy and depth are 2 things that go together. So when you lose depth in advertising or in art, as you did in the Reformation, there is this flatness that tends to emerge, with the left brain. The left brain sees things as flat. It has no real proper sense of depth. So yes, in our testing, actually, we test advertising for emotional response to try and predict its effectiveness. we've seen that advertising that has that demonstrates a sense of connection with community, looking back, that shows historical scenes, that has characters and individuals that are interesting, a scene unfolding. These things connect really well with people, and this mechanistic sort of stuff doesn't. The other type of advertising I described, and when it comes to, I suspect this is true of experiences too, but when it comes to advertising, the very best advertising that attracts attention and generates an emotional response in people, I believe, has three things, and that's characters, an incident, and place. If you got those three things, then you will attract people's attention, you will entertain them, and you will do wonders for your brand. But anyway, that's some new work that I'm working on. But I think that connection with place is really important, and that betweenness that is gone from much advertising anyway.
I think building on your point, go ahead.
Two types of story in the world: a hero goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. It's a character, place, and an event. But sorry, Natalie, I jumped in. But can I just pose a question to everyone before you carry on, Natalie, quickly? But we've had a bit of a theme coming in on some of the questions around authenticity. So some people talking about how important is it to prove brand values, in action, and how brands demonstrate their kind of core values through real behavior. Because I know we're a world where people, are big fans of virtuous messages at the moment, and is there a question around authenticity? I'm going to throw that across to everyone, but Natalie, if you could pick that up, that'd be great.
Sure. So actually, this kind of does link nicely to what Orlando was saying about characters, incident, and the kind of this being able to create stories that resonate with people. So one of the things that I saw with brands that did particularly well over the COVID pandemic, there's one in particular called Cat's Deli, which is in a part of New York, and they've been around since the First World War. So they've been through 2 world wars, there's 9/11, there's the Great Depression, and they've also been living throughout this pandemic period. And what was interesting about the story and the narrative that they tell is that they have these different characters, they have this story, they have a way of translating the nostalgia that is there through the brand story to the locality where they are. So being part of the community, being somewhere where originally people would meet every Friday and have a specific kind of food. And they even had a slogan that they revived, which probably wouldn't sit well with non-meat eaters, but it goes, "Send a salami to your boy in the army." And so that was in the First and Second World War. And now, more recently, during the earlier COVID months, they were helping to send packaged food to people on the front line. And so I think this goes to show several things. So one is this kind of rich history, the ability to live by certain values, to give back to the community, to be coherent in terms of what they say they're going to do. We're going to stand up for the community, and then doing it, to be able to tell a story that people are interested in, even if they're not a native New Yorker. And so there's quite a few things in there about narrative, nostalgia, and consistency and coherence of values over time that I think a lot of us could learn from, no matter the size of our brand or business.
That's fantastic. Actually, the ability to look back and understand our time and place in the world, the right brain again, it is so important. I mean, if you look at Shakespeare, Shakespeare looked back at antiquity for inspiration for his plays. If you look at Rembrandt, he, looked back at Raphael and others from the Renaissance to create his paintings, as well as looking at the people around him. Those two things he brought together. And, so looking back is so important. And I worry that we're not doing it enough, that we think that everything has to be future facing. Well, to move forward, you have to look back sometimes. And that, to your question about authenticity, Daryl, this happened in the Reformation as well, that we tried to look, we stripped things back. We removed ornament, we removed metaphor, we removed characters in the saints. Things became reliant on the word. Stripping all these things back, smells, the sounds of the church, you strip these things back to try and find the authentic, and actually you're left with very little at all. You're left with nothing that's authentic, because authenticity is people, connection, individuals, characters, and what we can bring to the world. So that will be my answer to the authenticity point.
Thanks, Orlando. That's great. So sort of moving towards our final question, there are a couple more questions coming in again around values changing. Seems a key theme. And will we flip back to normal when more normal patterns of behaviour emerge? I'd like to begin to move towards the end of the session at the same time as thinking about that, and ask the question for the audience, really, what's going to be the most beneficial thing to pay attention to? How do they equip themselves? What's the mindset, or what do they need to be curious about that will best help them, whether they're a brand or a media platform or an agency or someone trying to communicate in one way or another? What's going to best equip them for the inevitable changes as whatever new normal takes place? And that's to everyone, so free for all, fight it out.
I can go first. I think there's probably three things. I think the first one, I agree with the panelists today. I think it's really about building empathy back in, because I think that there's going to be massive brand switching, and also retention is going to be a key theme for most brands and products. So I think being able to build empathy into the brand and service is really, really important. By doing that, I think it's really about looking at the interactions of the customer journey and the experience between A and B. So it was always a kind of hybrid of both the physical and digital. And I think that we kind of need to reassess which aspects of the actual experience that consumers are going through that we can try and make digital, or make it feel as real being used through a digital channel that's available to us. So I think there's definitely aspects of that. And I think, again, it's literally about tracking and monitoring through data, but that has to also be backed up with, the customer real life research as well. And I'll always bang on about that because it's very close to my heart. I mean, even if you look at the debacle with the exam results, which is based on just an algorithm alone, you really do need to have that kind of human insight as well as the data. But I think it's about tracking and monitoring, really looking at the journey, and then building also that kind of authenticity and empathy as well.
I'm muted again. Thanks, Rachel. That's brilliant. Who's next?
Can I jump in there? And actually,
yeah, please.
One thing that you said, actually, that Rachel, that I think is critical, which is that word insight. And I think maybe we've sort of walked past or forgotten what that word should mean and what it should deliver for an organization or for a project or a person or whatever it might be. In my mind, it should transform the way that you see something. You shouldn't be able to go back to the view that you used to have when you were presented with this insight. I think Hilary Mantel said that Wolf Hall is an insight. It's changed the way that we view that period of time. And I think what we need to hold on to is the determination, ambition, and bravery to be doing that, bringing more insight into our thinking and the way that we work. And I think everything we've been saying, there's a sort of the human nature or human behavior as brand owners, as a marketing community, is sort of saying it's terrible, it's fearful, hold on to what you can, drive efficiency, control everything. That's the absolute antithesis of someone going, I don't know anything. Tell me something new, surprise me, make me nervous. I'm going to do something I've never done before. And for me, that is the pinch point of where we are now, I think, in this year, and where we're going to get to next. And the brands that will survive and will build themselves in a brilliant way through simplistic but incredibly values-driven or values-appropriate communications are those that are able to do that, are able to put their hand up and say, I don't know anymore. I don't know this audience. I really don't know these people, but I'm going to go and find out. And have that broad, open mind to find the insight that changes the way that they think about things so that they can evolve and they can kind of emerge stronger.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thanks, Will. Absolutely. Absolutely. Natalie?
Sure. So I think in terms of insights and how to understand people moving forward, it kind of connects in with some of the questions that are being asked about changing consumer behaviors, whether they're specific to this moment, which ones will go forward. I think there's a real opportunity now to use the context that we've just experienced, that we're still going through, to really consider what is it that we actually want to bring forward. So not just thinking about, obviously it's important to see where people's behavior is going anyway, so to react to our consumers through insight, through research. But I think there's a real opportunity also to decide, well, what do we as a brand want to stand for? Let's look internally. What do we care about as founders? And you can do it from the outside in, or you can do it from the perspective of what are the future customers of tomorrow going to care about? I think generally speaking, the brands that I've seen that have been the most appreciated in this time are the ones that have that intrinsic motivation to give back, the intrinsic motivation to make sure we have a sustainable way of living, that people are included, that we have a society that's inclusive and that allows more rich and democratic dialogue. And I know that this is sort of maybe taking it again a bit way out into the existential questions, but I really do think that when there is, as Will suggested earlier, so much emphasis, especially in the media, on division and on fear, and we know that viral content tends to be that which is driven by more basic emotions such as fear, alienation. We know that viral content on Twitter, if it's fake, it's 6 times more likely to be adopted than if it's not. You know, I think there's a real opportunity to decide what kind of world we want to build. And so if you're a brand and you're a consumer, make sure that you're building on values that you want to see propagated down the line.
Absolutely. I think when we are clueless, we have to gravitate to those bigger, more abstract North Stars of, you know, what are we trying to create here? And I couldn't agree more, Natalie. It's brilliant. Thank you so much. Orlando?
Well, I think that, you know, what we'll see, what I fear we'll see is the left brain trying to take control of things a lot more. So we will see greater automation, systematization, a procedural sort of monitoring of things, a focus on efficiency, the removal of people from businesses to make things cheaper, you know, all of those sorts of things. And I hope that we will also find room for the right brain, the importance of connection, betweenness, altruism, humility, as Will suggests, you know, a sense of humility that we don't know everything. We can't predict the future. It would be foolish to try and predict the future, I think. You know, the prediction of the future is quite a left brain thing, because it's a sense of control over what's going to come, and we can't really know for sure. But we can try and change it ourselves, and we can try towards a more generous, altruistic future. And I think brands that can demonstrate that they are enabling people in these difficult circumstances to have a better life will be the ones that come through, as Natalie says. And we've already seen that in advertising, and the sorts of brands that advertise in that way and show how they're helping and giving back to the world are the ones that are connecting much better than the mechanistic brands telling people what and what not to do.
Brilliant. So we're starting a revolution, ladies and gentlemen. We are moving away from data and towards genuine insight and real observation and a bit more authenticity. This has been fun. Who wants to be in charge of the revolution? Any takers? There's Will's volunteered, so that's terrific. Guys, I've thoroughly enjoyed every moment of this chat. It is a privilege to be in a gang with you lot, and I look forward to the next event. For those of you listening, there's a handful of people on the council that are as fascinating as the people that you met today. So hopefully you'll join us for another one. But I think that pretty much brings us to a close. I'll hand back to you, Holly. Thanks again for the opportunity. Thanks for running it. It's been a bit of a laugh. Thank you.
Thanks.
No problem at all. It's my pleasure. Thank you all so much. Yeah, that was a fantastic first session. I hope for many, many more. So to round things off, yeah, a huge thank you to all of you. You're brilliant. If you would like to watch this again, I'm sure many of you would, you can use the same link that you used to join today. We will also be sending a follow-up. One of my poor team will have to attempt to write this up, so that'll be interesting. And we'll try and send as many links, etc., as possible, case studies that were mentioned throughout. Also, if you are a member of BIMA, you can also join our Slack. So we will. I know a number of the council are on Slack, and it's always a good place to continue those conversations. And if you didn't get a question answered, who knows, you might get a question answered on Slack. And there's tons of other stuff going on there as well. There is a lot going on over September, October at BIMA. I would just draw your attention to the fact that we launched the State of the Digital Industry report last week. So that's now available to everyone worldwide to download. It's a really interesting survey of both agencies and client side, and looks at the relationship between the two and how it gives advice around how to navigate that relationship. So super interesting and worth a download. We will send a link to that. We are launching a BIMA Charities Council report next week, which is looking at the digital capabilities of the charity sector. So again, really interesting. We have a direct-to-consumer e-commerce event in October. So I know Will mentioned it's a very popular thing at the moment, and everyone's racing to do that. So you can learn how then. And we have a future of work. I'm going in no particular order here. Future of work on the 30th of September with the Insight director of Verizon Media, and they've done a huge piece of research. So she'll be presenting that. Last but not least, the BIMA conference we announced yesterday will be running this year. It will be virtual, but we will make it as fun and insightful as possible. And it's on the 18th and 19th of November. And if you're a member, you get free access, so sign up. That's me. Thanks, everyone. Have an amazing evening. Thanks again to our Human Behaviour Council and to all of our speakers. That was fantastic. Cheers.
Bye-bye.